The Grand Oak Bistro shimmered beneath the Chicago skyline like a secret jewel, nestled between towering glass buildings and ivy-covered brick. It was the kind of place where the rich whispered deals over crystal glasses, where time moved slower like syrup sliding down warm pancakes. Inside, everything was golden. The walls, the chandeliers, the mood. Waiters moved like shadows, soft jazz floated in the air, and the scent of aged wine and rosemary butter wrapped around the guests like a lullaby. At a private booth by the window, a man sat alone. His name was Nathaniel Wren. You may have heard of him, or maybe you haven't, but in the boardrooms of the world, he was a legend. A self-made millionaire by 30, a reclusive empire builder by 35. And now at 43, the name Nathaniel Wren was both feared and respected. They called him the Mind of Manhattan, the one who could read numbers like poetry. But tonight, Nathaniel didn't look like a legend. He looked tired, not in the way that sleep fixes, but soul-tired. His eyes were sharp but distant, like a man surrounded by everything, yet still searching for something. Across from him sat his oldest friend, Julian Cole, an attorney with silver hair and a heart like old oak. "You're doing it again," Julian murmured, sipping his drink. Nathaniel blinked. "Doing what?" "Looking like you're about to fire the universe." Nathaniel chuckled softly, a sound like dry leaves. "Maybe I am." Julian raised a brow. "Legacy stuff?" Nathaniel stared out the window, watching the soft glimmer of headlights. "It's all built, Julian. Everything I set out to do, I did it. The wealth, the homes, the headlines. But it all feels like scaffolding. It's like it's holding up something hollow." Julian leaned forward. "You're lonely." Nathaniel didn't answer, just swirled his wine, watching the crimson liquid dance. "I have no family. No one to pass this to. And you know what the board wants? A successor they can parade. Partner they can understand. Someone who looks the part." "You've tried dating," Julian offered gently. "Dating?" Nathaniel scoffed. "You mean the curated interviews disguised as dinners?" "I'm tired, Jules. Tired of resumes and heels." Gave a sympathetic smile. "So what now?" Nathaniel's fingers drummed on the table. Then they stopped. A stillness came over him, that quiet kind, like when something clicks in your soul. He looked toward the entrance. His eyes gleamed with a spark that hadn't been there moments before. "A bet," he whispered. Julian blinked. "Sorry." Nathaniel straightened, his voice low and deliberate. "The next woman who walks through that door." He paused, a small smile curling at the edge of his lips. "I'm going to marry her." Julian choked slightly on his scotch. "You're joking?" "Nope, that's insane." Nathaniel shrugged. "Insanity built my empire. Maybe it'll build my heart too." Julian stared at him. "She's already married. Then I lose the bet. What if she's not a thing? What if she's not who you imagine?" Nathaniel leaned back, folding his hands calmly. "That's the point. I've imagined too much, planned too much. This time, I want something I didn't see coming." Julian ran a hand through his hair. "You need sleep." Nathaniel's eyes didn't leave the door. "I need life then." It happened. The door creaked softly, a small sound in the large room, and time slowed. Not in the dramatic movie way, but in the quiet, aching way that happens just before something changes. Every head didn't turn. The music didn't stop. But inside Nathaniel, a hush bloomed. She stepped in, small against the tall doorway. Not a celebrity, not a socialite, just her. She wore a simple coat worn at the edges. Her shoes were soaked from melted snow. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid, a little messy. She didn't carry luxury, she carried gentleness. Her name is Elsie. But Nathaniel didn't know that yet. All he saw was the way her eyes flickered with nervousness. The way she paused at the entrance like she didn't belong. She clutched a tiny menu flyer like it was a passport to another world. She looked lost, cold, beautiful in a quiet way, like a song without words. Julian whispered Nate. "She's not what you expected." Nathaniel stood up slowly. "She's exactly what I didn't expect." He stepped away from the booth, heart pounding in a rhythm he hadn't felt in years. He approached her slow, steady. Elsie looked up. Startled, I'm sorry, I in the wrong place? Nathaniel smiled gently. You're exactly where you're meant to be. She blinked. I'm not sure I can afford, he offered his hand. Have dinner with me. She stared at him, a stranger in a tailored coat, speaking like a dream. Why? He held her gaze. Because I made a promise. And you're the answer. Elsie hesitated. Then slowly, she placed her hand in his. It was warm, real, trembling a little. And just like that, the room fell away. The past fell silent, and a new chapter began. The Mater D watched with raised eyebrows as Nathaniel Wren led a rain-soaked stranger into the private booth reserved for Manhattan's most powerful, but he said nothing. He didn't question Nathaniel, not even when he did the unimaginable. Elsie slid into the booth across from him, cautiously, her fingers still damp and cold. She glanced around nervously at the polished wood, the glimmering candlelight, the menus wrapped in gold-embossed leather. This place, she whispered. I don't think I belong here. Nathaniel smiled gently. Neither do I, some nights. She looked at him then, really looked at the suit that probably cost more than her rent, at the calm certainty in his voice, at the kindness in his eyes, not loud, not forced. Just there, quietly waiting. A waiter appeared like a shadow, placing down menus. Whatever she wants, Nathaniel murmured, not breaking eye contact with her. And a tea. Hot. Elsie nodded, still unsure, still shrinking into her coat. You don't even know my name. No, he said, but I'd like to. A soft pause stretched between them. Elsie, she said finally. Elsie Hart. Nathaniel's name was known by the world, but hers. Hers was whispered like a secret. And in that moment, Nathaniel didn't care about the board, or the bet, or the headlines. He just wanted to know how a name like that ended up walking through his door outside. Snow began to fall. Inside, a cup of chamomile steamed quietly in front of her, curling warmth around her fingers. She held it like it was. Keeping her upright, he waited, gently, patiently, letting silence do what pressure never could. Finally, she spoke. I'm not supposed to be here. Why not? He asked. Elsie exhaled slowly, staring at the tea. Because I was just looking for somewhere warm. I thought this was still a diner it used to be. The sign outside still says open. I didn't mean to intrude. Nathaniel's voice was soft. You didn't. She looked at him then, her eyes clouded with hesitation. This isn't a setup, is it? A trick. No tricks, he promised. No cameras, no hidden agenda. Then why? She asked, her voice barely audible. He paused. A moment of truth balanced on the edge of his breath, because he said slowly, I told myself that the next woman who walked through that door, I'd marry her. Silence, thick, surreal, fragile. Elsie blinked once, then again, unsure. If she heard him right, her fingers froze around the teacup. Excuse me? Nathaniel leaned forward, his voice low, not just in volume, but in sincerity. I've spent my life making decisions based on logic, strategy, power, but when it came to something deeper, I kept waiting, planning, controlling. And tonight, I decided to stop and marry a stranger, she asked, breathless. He nodded, not for publicity, not to shock anyone. It's just to let the universe speak. And it spoke. It sent me you. Elsie's eyes welled slightly, and she looked away, swallowing hard. I'm not, she whispered, what you think I am. Nathaniel tilted his head. And what do you think I think you are? No family. A jacket full of holes. I don't own heels. I haven't had a bank account in 3 years. I walked 3 blocks barefoot last week because my shoes tore open. I'm not some pretty mystery you can fix. Nathaniel listened, not flinching, not pulling away. I'm not looking for someone to fix, he said softly. I'm looking for someone real. Her lip trembled. Just a little. You don't know me. Not yet, he agreed. But you want to marry me? His eyes were steady. Yes. A tear slid down her cheek. Not out of sadness, but something deeper. Something terrifyingly gentle. Why? She asked again like a prayer. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers just barely, because he whispered, "You walked in?" Time moved strangely after that. Not fast, not slow, just softly. They talked about things that didn't matter at first. The weather, the tea, the restaurants, strange history. Then about books, then about music, and about what kept them up at night. Elsie laughed once, just once. And when she did, something melted in Nathaniel's chest. Not infatuation, not fantasy, but recognition. Like he'd been waiting for this. Sound without even knowing it. At one point, she looked up and said, "You still haven't asked about my past." Nathaniel smiled. "You'll tell me when you're ready." And she did. A little bits and pieces. Her mother had been soft, her father absent. She'd worked in a bookstore once before it closed. She'd lived in her car for a month last year. She still had a paper diary she wrote poems in. She trusted very slowly, but completely when she did. And he told her, in return, about how silence had become his companion. About how his father taught him to fear emotion. How he built his empire brick by brick, only to find no one inside the castle. They didn't fall in love that night, but they fell into something, a beginning. And sometimes, beginnings are louder than love. As the clock passed midnight and the restaurant emptied, Nathaniel stood. "Come with me," he said. Quietly, Dulcie stood too, unsure. But her feet followed, almost dreamlike. Outside, snow blanketed the sidewalks in silence. The air was cold, but soft, like the city was holding its breath. Nathaniel opened the passenger door of a sleek black car, not with arrogance, but with reverence. She hesitated, then stepped inside. As they pulled away, neither of them knew where this would go. But the road had already begun. The drive through the city was quiet, not in silence, but in peace. Outside the windows, the world passed by like a lullaby. Streetlights casting gentle halos, snow falling in slow spirals, taxi horns muffled by the thick blanket of white. Inside the car, Elsie stared out, her breath making tiny clouds on the cool glass. She didn't speak much, neither did Nathaniel. But the quiet wasn't awkward. It was warm. She glanced sideways at him once. His eyes were on the road, calm, steady, like he was driving towards something he already believed in. "You didn't ask where I wanted to go," she said softly. Nathaniel turned to her, a faint smile in his eyes. "Do you want to go somewhere?" Elsie hesitated, then shook her head. "No, just noticing." He nodded once and looked forward again. "I'm taking you to my home, but only if you're comfortable. No pressure. Just warmth." Warmth. She hadn't heard that word in weeks, not in a way that meant more than temperature. She folded her arms, hugging herself gently. "Okay," she whispered. The building was tall, one of those sleek, sky-touching towers that looked like glass wrapped around a secret. The lobby was gold and marble, polished to a hush. The doorman nodded as they passed, but didn't speak. Everyone in the building knew Nathaniel Wren. More importantly, they knew how to respect his silence. They took the elevator to the 42nd floor. As it rose, Elsie's fingers played with the edge of her coat sleeve. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat. Was this real? She was standing beside a man the world called untouchable, and he was looking at her like she was something sacred. She hadn't felt sacred in years. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime. Nathaniel stepped out first, then paused for her to follow. The hallway was quiet, the carpet thick and cloud-like, beneath their steps. And then his apartment. He opened the door with a quiet click. The space inside was not what Elsie expected. Not grand, not cold, but warm. Dimly lit, smelling faintly of cedar wood and clean linen. The walls were lined with books, real books, worn spines, bent corners. A soft gray couch sat beneath tall windows. A single candle flickered on the coffee table. There were no signs of a billionaire's ego, just Stillness, like the home belonged to someone who spent years building noise, then finally chose quiet. Elsie stepped inside slowly. Nathaniel watched her, then gently took her coat and hung it by the door. "Would you like tea?" he asked. She nodded. "If it's not too much trouble?" "Nothing with you feels like trouble," he said. Quietly, her cheeks warmed at that. She stood near the window as he moved into the kitchen. From behind her, she could hear the sound of water filling a kettle, the soft clink of porcelain mugs. Below them, the city glowed like a constellation, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Elsie felt safe. Not saved, not rescued, just not alone. He returned a few minutes later, offering her a mug with both hands. "Peppermint," he said. "No caffeine." She took it gratefully, letting the steam warm her face. "Thank you." They sat on the couch, not touching, just near enough to feel the other's breath. "I used to imagine this moment," Nathaniel said after a while. "Not exactly this, but something like it. Someone beside me, not for money or image, just presence." Elsie sipped her tea. "I stopped imagining things like this a long time ago." He looked at her. "Why?" She swallowed. "Because when you lose too much, it hurts to hope." A soft silence settled between them again. Then Nathaniel asked, "What's something you've never told anyone?" Elsie blinked. "Why would I tell you?" "Because," he said, "I don't want your polished version. I want your truth." Exhaled, long and slow, and then she answered, "When I was 12, I used to talk to the moon. Out loud, like she could hear me. I thought if I said things to her, she'd carry them away. Far from me." Nathaniel didn't laugh, didn't smile. He just nodded. She probably did. Elsie looked at him, eyes glistening. "What about you?" He took a sip from his own cup. "When I was 15, I wrote letters to my future wife. I didn't know who she'd be, but I wrote them anyway. I have a whole box in the closet." She stared at him. "You're not real," he smiled gently. "Neither are most people, until they are." That night, he offered her the guest room. Fresh sheets, warm light, a folded towel and a toothbrush left on the sink like magic. She stood in the doorway, looking at the bed like it might disappear. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Double quotes, "Yes," Nathaniel said. "You're safe here. Sleep, Elsie." She did. For the first time in weeks, she slept without fear, and outside, the snow kept falling. Quiet and kind. The skyline outside the tall windows was bathed in a muted silver glow. As soft snowflakes continued their gentle descent, not in a rush, not in a storm, just falling like they were meant to. Inside the apartment, everything was still, until the sound of quiet footsteps padded softly across the wooden floor. Elsie stood in the hallway, barefoot, wrapped in the robe Nathaniel had left hanging on the door. She looked unsure, as if reality might snap back at any moment. Like this place, this warmth, this safety might vanish if she dared enjoy it too long. But the smell of coffee, freshly brewed and earthy, was like an anchor. She followed it. Nathaniel was already in the kitchen, and in sleep clothes. Simple and soft, no power suits, no headlines, just a man. Making 2 cups of coffee, his hair slightly tousled. His eyes warm when they met hers. "Good morning," he said gently. "Good morning," she whispered back, as if afraid to speak. Too loud, he handed her a mug. "Sugar's on the counter." She took it, holding it close with both hands. "Thank you." Again. Nathaniel leaned against the counter, his voice low and unhurried. "Sleep okay?" Elsie nodded. "Better than I have in." She didn't say why. Didn't need to, he already knew. They moved to the living room again, sunlight touching the floor in soft stripes through the curtains. The couch was warm, silence even warmer. Nathaniel reached to the side table and pulled out a small wooden box. He placed it between them. "What's that?" she asked softly. "The letters," he said. Elsie blinked. "From when you were 15? He nodded, fingers brushing the lid. "Some are silly, some are hopeful, most are somewhere in between. I haven't read them in years. I didn't think I ever would." Elsie stared at the box. And now? He looked at her. Now you're here. Long pause. He opened it. Inside, neat envelopes, stacked like a secret library. Some faded, some newer. All labeled in handwriting that changed over the years from boyish scribbles to sharp, adult strokes. He took one, read it silently, then smiled and handed it to her. Go ahead. Elsie opened the envelope carefully as if the paper might crumble. She read aloud, voice soft. Dear you, I don't know your name yet, but I hope when I meet you, you're not perfect. I hope you cry at movies and sing in the car. I hope you know how to sit in silence without being afraid. I hope you don't care about my money or my name. Hope you just care about breakfast and kindness and looking people in the eye. If you're out there, I'm waiting for you, love. Nathaniel She looked up, tears threatened behind her lashes. That boy, she whispered, was waiting for someone like me. Nathaniel didn't speak, just held her gaze, and she saw the answer in his eyes. Yes. Later. That day, she wandered through his apartment like a quiet guest in a museum of memory. Bookshelves, filled with everything from economics to poetry. Photographs in black frames, most of landscapes, few of people. A piano, untouched but polished. A balcony with a small garden that looked like it hadn't seen winter yet. She found a journal once tucked beneath a lamp. She didn't read. It just held it for a moment and placed it gently back. Nathaniel watched her quietly, and when she turned around, he said something that made her pause. You can stay, Elsie. She tilted her head. Stay today. Wait for as long as you want. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't answer. Not right away. She walked to the window. Snowflakes drifted gently outside like feathers, and after a long, long moment, she said, I want to believe you. He stepped beside her. Then believe me, I want to stay, she said. But I'm scared. He nodded. So am I. Looked up at him. You're scared? He offered a faint smile. Of course. I built an empire to protect myself from exactly this. This feeling something real. Elsie let the silence stretch again. Then, with trembling courage, she whispered, Then let's be scared together. That night, she didn't sleep in the guest room. She slept beside him, not in the way the world rushes toward, but in the way trust builds. One breath at a time, side by side. No rush, no need to explain. In the days that followed, time began to stretch in unfamiliar ways. Not in the endless loops Elsie had known before. The restless hours curled under bridges or waiting in shelters where every moment felt borrowed and fragile. But here, time softened. It folded around her like warm fabric. Morning tea became ritual. Evening walks on the balcony became comfort. And Nathaniel became a question she didn't mind asking again and again. They didn't speak much about the future. Not yet. Instead, they shared fragments of themselves. It's the way people do when they're testing the temperature of something fragile. Nathaniel taught her how to play chess, though she was more interested in the stories behind the pieces. Then the rules. Elsie showed him how to make cinnamon toast without burning it, a skill she claimed was harder than it looked. One night, they watched an old black and white film on his projector. She fell asleep halfway through, curled on his shoulder. He didn't wake her. He just listened to her breathing and thought about how still the world felt when she was near. But not everything stayed soft. Reality, as it often does, knocked at the door. Literally, it was a Tuesday morning. The sky was pale, and the apartment smelled faintly of toast. Nathaniel had just stepped out of the shower when a firm knock echoed through the hall. He opened the door with a towel slung over his shoulder. Julian stood there, briefcase in one hand. Worry in his eyes. Morning, Nathaniel said, stepping aside. Is she here? Julian asked quietly. Nathaniel nodded once. She's in the kitchen. Then we need to talk. Privately. They stepped into the study. Nathaniel closed the door. Julian turned, face tight. You disappeared? I didn't disappear, Nathaniel said calmly. I stepped back. You've missed 3 board meetings, Nathaniel. The media's sniffing around. The shareholders are an inch away from panic. Nathaniel leaned against the bookshelf, arms folded. And, Julian said sharply, you brought a homeless woman into your penthouse. And word is starting to leak. Nathaniel's jaw tightened. She's not a headline, he said. She's a human being. I know that, Julian said. You know that. The world doesn't, and they will spin this into whatever sells. Nathaniel stared at the floor for a long moment. Then, he spoke. Do you remember the first company I ever bought? Frowned. Yes. A failing coffee chain in Brooklyn. You were 23. They were 3 months from closing. I walked in, ordered a cappuccino, and ended up writing a check that saved 40 jobs. Julian nodded. Nathaniel looked up. Why did I do that? 'Cause the woman behind the counter reminded you of your mother. Nathaniel's voice softened. Exactly. I saw something no one else did. Not data, not trends. A person. A story. And this woman, Julian said carefully, Elsie? She's not a rescue, Nathaniel said. She's a mirror. Julian studied him. You're in deep. Not drowning, Nathaniel said. I'm breathing. Meanwhile, Elsie stood in the kitchen, holding a mug of peppermint tea, staring out at the skyline. She could hear the faint hum of conversation behind the closed door, and she knew what they were talking about her. Later, Nathaniel returned to the living room. She didn't ask what was said, but he came to her gently and took her hand. I'd like you to meet someone, he said. She looked up. Who? He smiled softly. My daughter. That evening, they drove out of the city. The skyline faded behind them, swallowed by dusk and pine trees. The air smelled different out here, fresher, like beginnings. They arrived at a small cottage. Near a lake. It was quiet, the water still, the trees holding the sky in place, and there, on the porch steps, sat a girl. Or rather, a young woman / Emily. She stood when she saw them, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. Her posture proud but not cold. Nathaniel stepped forward. Emily, this is Elsie. Elsie gave a small wave, unsure, her heart fluttering. Emily tilted her head, studying her. Then without a word, she stepped forward and hugged her. Elsie froze, then slowly melted into the embrace. Nathaniel watched, something tightening in his throat. Emily pulled back and smiled. Dad talks about you like you invented sunlight. Elsie laughed, eyes glistening. I don't think I've ever done anything close to that. Emily looked at her father. He disagrees. They spent the evening by the lake, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. Emily was sharp, a blend of wit and warmth. She worked in clean energy, had a rescue dog named Maple, and once spent a year living on a boat. She didn't ask about Elsie's past. Didn't need to. She asked about books, about favorite colors, about childhood memories. And when Nathaniel went inside to fetch blankets, Emily turned to Elsie and asked, Do you love him? Elsie paused, then slowly, I'm starting to. Emily nodded. Good, he needs someone who sees the man, not the legacy. I don't care about the money, Elsie said quietly. I know, Emily smiled. That's why he brought you here. That night, they slept in the cottage. Nathaniel held her hand beneath the covers, and they listened to the lake whisper against the shore. And somewhere in the darkness, he whispered, I want to write you a letter. Not to my future wife. To you. Elsie didn't answer, but she squeezed his hand, and in the silence, it was enough. Elsie stirred beneath the quilt, the fabric warm against her cheek. The air just cool enough to make her curl inward a little. She opened her eyes slowly, adjusting to the light, and found the bed empty beside her, but not cold. On the nightstand, a piece of folded paper sat waiting, cream-colored, handwritten. Her name was written on the front in calm, confident strokes. Elsie, she sat up slowly, her fingers hesitating just above the edge of the paper, her breath catching like a leaf on still water. Then she opened it. Elsie, I don't know if you believe in fate. I'm not sure I did either. But then you walked through a door I wasn't even sure. I wanted to open, and everything changed. I've built my life around control, around making sure everything fit into its perfect place. But you, Elsie, you don't fit. Not into a plan. Not into a model. You walk into a room and bring your own weather. And I think, maybe that's exactly what I've needed. You scare me, because when I look at you, I stop thinking in terms of risk and return. I start thinking in moments, in breaths, and how your laughter sounds at 3 a.m., or the way you hug your knees when you're nervous, or how you say thank you like it's a gift you're not used to giving. I don't know if this will last forever, but I do know that, for as long as I have breath in me, I will never see you as anything less than extraordinary. You once said, you're not the kind of woman people write about. You were wrong. Nathaniel, her hand trembled. She folded the letter gently, carefully, as though it were made of something holy. When she stepped outside, Nathaniel was sitting at the edge of the dock, bare feet dipped into the water, sleeves rolled up, a cup of coffee cradled between his palms. He didn't turn when she approached. He just said, "Good morning." She sat beside him. The air was cool, but not biting. The lake mirrored the sky in pale blues and silvers. Elsie didn't speak. Not for a while, then. Finally. "You wrote me a letter," I did. Made me cry. I hoped it would. She laughed softly, nudging his shoulder. "You're impossible." Only a little. Pause. She glanced at him sideways. "You're really not afraid to fall, are you?" He sipped his coffee. "It's fallen. Before? Just never into something that felt like landing." They stayed at the cottage for 2 more days. They cooked simple meals. Barefoot in the kitchen, she sang a little, mostly under her breath, not knowing he was listening. He read poetry aloud, voice quiet like it was meant only for the space between them. At night, they watched the stars and talked about things that lived beneath the surface. Regrets, hopes, the kinds of dreams they never told anyone else because they sounded too big or too small. And when she curled into his chest, whispering, "I'm not sure I deserve this," he whispered back, "Then I'll keep reminding you." On the 3rd morning, they returned to the city, but something was different now, not the skyline, not the building them. They walked into his penthouse as something more than a coincidence, or more than a bet. More than to people with scars, they were becoming a story. When Elsie stepped into the apartment, a small gasp escaped her lips, because sitting in the center of the living room was an easel, and on the easel was a painting. It wasn't framed. It wasn't signed. It wasn't polished, but it was her soft colors, warm lines. Her face turned toward a window, lit by imagined morning light. The kind of painting that didn't just see a person's features, it saw their presence. She stared. Frozen, Nathaniel stepped behind her, placing a gentle hand on her back. "I don't usually paint people," he said, "but I couldn't. Stop seeing this." She turned toward him, eyes glassy. "You painted me. I started the first night you stayed here," he said. "I didn't know where it would go." "I don't know where we'll go," she whispered. Nathaniel smiled, "So it makes it beautiful." Later that evening, as snow began to fall again, softly tapping the windows like a lullaby, Nathaniel turned to her and said something that changed everything. "Come to the gala with me." She looked up from her tea. "What gala?" He leaned against the counter, watching her. "The annual Midtown Legacy Gala. Everyone will be there. Board members, press donors." Her face stiffened slightly. "You want to bring me?" "Want the world to meet the woman who saved me from myself." "Oh." She lowered her gaze. "I don't have the kind of dress people wear to things like that." He walked over, lifted her chin gently. "You don't need their kind of dress. You just need to be you." Her voice trembled. "They'll judge me." "They might," he admitted. "But I won't let them define you." A pause. Then she smiled softly, quietly, like something inside her had finally begun to believe it. "Okay," she said. "Let's show them what unpredictable looks like." The evening of the gala arrived like a breath held too long, outside. The city shimmered under layers of light, traffic glowing like veins across the landscape, snow resting gently unparked, cars and the occasional gust of wind brushing past the tall buildings like a whisper in the penthouse. Elsie stood in front of the mirror. She wore a dress the color of midnight deep blue velvet that hugged her quietly, flowing just enough to move like water. The tailor Nathaniel had arranged was discreet and kind. The seamstress had said, "We'll match the dress to you, not the other way around." Now, as she adjusted the simple earrings Emily had loaned her, Elsie tried to quiet the old voices inside her. "You don't belong here. You'll be a headline, not a guest. They'll see right through you." But tonight something was different. She wasn't walking in alone. Nathaniel stepped into the room behind her, pausing as his eyes found her in the mirror's reflection. "You look." His voice caught, ... like you've always belonged. She turned to face him. He wore a black tuxedo, clean and classic. But what softened him wasn't the tailoring. It was his expression, the way he looked at her like she was the only thing that mattered in the entire room. "You clean up all right yourself," she said, trying to hide the tremble in her voice. He stepped closer and without words held out his hand. She took it, and they left together. The ballroom at the Midtown Legacy Hotel was dressed in crystal and gold. A string quartet played softly from the corner, and chandeliers bathed the room in warm, cascading light. It was a place built for grand impressions, where power greeted power, and charm came with price tags. When Nathaniel and Elsie entered, a hush seemed to fall just slightly. Just enough, not from scandal, not from malice, but surprise. He, the untouchable mogul, the king of controlled headlines, and she, a quiet figure with mystery in her eyes and no name in the tabloids. She didn't try to smile too wide, didn't pretend to be someone else. She just walked beside him. Fingers threaded through his, posture soft but unshakable. Julian met them at the far end of the room. "You made it," he said. Nathaniel nodded. "We did." Julian looked at Elsie, eyes kind. "You look radiant." "Thank you," she said gently. A few board members approached, older men in sharp suits, their curiosity thinly veiled behind polite smiles. Nathaniel introduced her, his voice calm, proud. "This is Elsie Hart. She's with me. Not a date, not an assistant, not a +1. With me, those two words carried a weight that silenced every doubt in the air. Later, the speeches began, and cameras flashed from a respectful distance. Elsie stood near the balcony alone, needing a breath. Emily found her there. "They're all wondering who you are," she said, handing Elsie a flute of sparkling water. Elsie smiled faintly. "I know, and the irony." Emily leaned in. "You're the only real person here." Elsie glanced back at the crowd. "I feel like I'm in a dream," Emily nodded. "Maybe, but it's one you chose to stay in, and that makes all the difference." A pause. "Does he really seem different to you?" Elsie asked. Emily took a sip of her drink. "He laughs more, he listens deeper, and he paints again." Elsie blinked. "He hadn't been painting?" Emily shook her head. "Not since my mother left," said. Color felt dishonest. Elsie's throat tightened, but now Emily said, placing a hand on Elsie's shoulder, "He sees color again, because of you." Near the end of the evening, as a soft jazz piece filled the room, Nathaniel approached Elsie once more. "Dance with me," he said. "I don't really know how," she replied, cheeks warm. "Neither do I," he said. "We'll learn together." So they danced, not perfectly, but beautifully. Two souls swaying beneath a chandelier, not to impress, but to connect. The world didn't disappear, but it faded, until it was just them. Moving slowly, hearts quietly sinking to a rhythm that no one else could hear. Afterward, in the car ride home, Elsie leaned her head on his shoulder. "Tonight was," she began, then trailed off. "Too much?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, just something I'll never forget." He kissed the top of her head. "You were unforgettable." When they stepped inside the penthouse, the silence welcomed them like an old friend. He helped her out of her coat. She helped him out of his uncertainty. And as they stood in the quiet of the hallway, he looked at her like it was the first time. And every time all at once, then he whispered, "I meant what I said. I'm not afraid to fall." Elsie looked up at him, eyes clear, steady. The days after the gala moved slowly, not sluggish, but graceful, like two people finally learning the tempo of peace. The world, of course, kept spinning. The markets fluctuated, deadlines arrived, interviews were requested. But inside Nathaniel's penthouse, none of it touched them. Not really. They had found something more valuable than calm. They had found each other's quiet. One afternoon, a delivery arrived. Elsie had been reading near the window, barefoot in one of Nathaniel's old sweaters, curled into a soft throw. Blanket with a mug of herbal tea beside her, Nathaniel returned holding a flat, wrapped package, thick brown paper tied with twine. "For you," he said. Her brow lifted. "What is it? Open it?" He smiled. She sat upright, carefully, undoing the twine. The paper crackled gently as she peeled it away. Inside was a painting. Her breath caught in her chest. It was a door, simple, wooden, slightly open. With warm light spilling out from inside, she stared at it. "The first night you stayed," he said softly, sitting beside her, "you left your door slightly open, just a crack. Remember standing in the hallway, looking at that sliver of light." She glanced at him, I thought. "Maybe that's what hope looks like," he continued. "A door that isn't locked. A space someone might step into." Her eyes began to sting with tears. "It was the first painting I finished of you," he said. "Before I painted your face, your posture, your breath, I painted your door." She touched the edge of the canvas like it was sacred. "It's beautiful. You're the one who made it that way," he whispered. Later that evening, she cooked dinner not because he asked, but because she wanted to. The kitchen filled with the sound of quiet laughter, of sizzling garlic, of clinking glasses and soft jazz humming from the corner speaker. They ate by candlelight, not for romance, necessarily, but for rhythm, for intention, and after they sat on the couch, curled into one another like sea and shore, she looked up at him, face half in shadow. "I've never felt this," she said softly. "This still, this safe." Nathaniel brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Then we're doing something right." A pause. "I keep waiting for the moment it all disappears," she confessed. "Like I'll wake up and it'll be gone. I'll be gone." Nathaniel shook his head, his voice barely louder than the firelight. "I won't let you disappear." She blinked once. "You promise?" He leaned his forehead against hers. "Promise." Days turned into weeks. Elsie began leaving her toothbrush by the sink without thinking. Nathaniel began sketching more napkins, notebooks, even her palm once. They began sharing habits, creating small rituals. Sunday tea, evening, playlists. Midday walks to nowhere in particular. They didn't talk about forever, but they lived like it mattered. One morning, Nathaniel was called away to a meeting that couldn't wait, a boardroom crisis, involving someone else's panic and someone else's spreadsheet. Elsie stayed behind, and for the first time, she wandered into his office, not to snoop, not to search, just to understand him more. The space was neat, almost austere, clean lines, dark wood, soft lighting, but the desk held a few quiet secrets. A framed photo of Emily as a toddler, blackstone paperweight in the shape of a feather, and beneath the blotter, a stack of handwritten notes, letters, dozens of them, unfinished, all addressed. "To the woman I haven't met yet?" Elsie sat slowly, fingertips brushing the topmost letter. "You might not believe this is real. I didn't either. But if you're reading this, then maybe we both found something we stopped looking for." She folded the paper gently, setting it back exactly how she found it. And in that moment, she understood something. He had been waiting for her, long before he even knew her name. When Nathaniel returned that evening, she was standing at the window. "Did you read them?" he asked. She turned. "I read one." He stepped closer. "I didn't mean to intrude. I wanted you to." Her brows lifted. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. "I wrote one more today," he said. He handed it to her. She opened it and read, "Dear Elsie, you're not just the woman I waited for. You're the home I never knew. I needed." Nathaniel, they didn't say anything else that night. Not because there was nothing to say, but because some moments are made to be felt, not spoken, so they sat in the golden quiet. A man who built empires with steel and glass, and a woman who taught him how to leave the door open. The world eventually noticed, they always do. What began as whispers in boardrooms and side glances at fundraisers soon turned into full-blown speculation in headlines and scrolling feeds. Photos surfaced of Nathaniel and Elsie walking hand in hand through a park, laughing over coffee on a quiet bench, sharing a look across a crowded room. No one knew her story, so they wrote their own. Billionaire's mystery woman, homeless or heiress. From the streets to the skyline, the woman who stole Nathaniel Wren's heart. What is Elsie Hart hiding? Elsie tried not to read them. She tried to hold on to the quiet life they'd built. But words have a way of finding cracks in your armor, and one morning, she broke. Nathaniel found her in the guest room, curled in the chair by the window, her phone in her lap, her face pale. "They've found where I used to stay," she said quietly. "The shelter. They're interviewing people, digging." Nathaniel's expression didn't change, not at first, but his jaw tensed. "I can fix this," he said. But Elsie shook her head. "That's just it. I don't want to be fixed. I want to be seen, as I am." "You are," he said, stepping closer. "By me. That's all that matters." She looked up at him, her eyes full of something deeper than fear. "I don't want if I need them to see it too." "Just once on my terms." "Oh, do you?" That evening, she made the call. Julian arranged everything, a quiet interview with a reporter who still believed in stories over scandal. A single article. One. At her voice. The interview was done in the apartment. No makeup crew. No lighting teams. Just Elsie, in her own words, and a reporter named Kara, who listened more than she asked. Elsie told her story. She didn't dramatize it, didn't hide it. She spoke of nights spent wrapped in cold blankets, of jobs lost, the exhaustion of being invisible. And then she spoke of a restaurant, a door, a man who didn't look away. "He didn't rescue me," she said. "He invited me in. And for the first time, someone left the door open and meant it." Article went live 3 days later. 3 days later. No clickbait title. No twisted facts. Just Elsie Hart. The woman behind the whisper, and something unexpected happened. The world listened. Strangers sent letters, some thanking her for her honesty, some sharing their own stories of nights spent on sidewalks, or in cars, or on borrowed couches. Some just wrote, "I see you." Nathaniel watched it all unfold in quiet awe. He wasn't used to feeling proud of someone else's voice. But now, every time he saw her name, he smiled. She hadn't just stepped into his life. She had claimed it as her own. One night after they'd gone out for a quiet dinner, no disguises, no hiding, they returned home, arms around each other, cheeks pink from the wind. They stood in the elevator, side by side, and Elsie leaned into him, murmuring, "Do you ever wonder how different things could have been if I hadn't walked through that door?" Nathaniel smiled. "No, because I think you would have found another way in." She laughed softly. "Persistent, am I? More like inevitable." Back in the apartment, she noticed something on the dining table. A small white box. Nathaniel followed her gaze and gave a soft smile. "Go ahead." She opened it. Inside was a key. Beneath it a note. "To the door you never have to knock on again. Welcome home." Nathaniel, she stared at it. The metal cool in her palm, the words warming her from the inside out. "You really mean it," she whispered. "I've never meant anything more." That night, they lit the fireplace and sat on the floor. No big declarations. No dramatic music, just her head on his shoulder, his fingers tracing slow circles on her back. And the shared knowing that they'd come through the noise not untouched, but unshaken. Together, some nights spoke louder in silence than in sound. This was one of those nights. No thunder, no chaos, just the hum of the penthouse as the city whispered outside. The flicker of candles, slow rhythm of two people learning how to exist beside each other. Not needing to fill the quiet, Elsie sat on the floor, legs folded beneath her, flipping slowly through an old leather-bound photo album she'd found. Tucked in one of Nathaniel's bookshelves, he came out of the kitchen holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea. One for her, one for him. He handed hers over and sat beside her, close enough that their knees touched. "What are you looking at?" he asked softly. She smiled. "You, at 17. With a truly terrible haircut, he chuckled, leaning over. To see, that was a phase. No, she teased. That was a crime. He shook his head, laughing quietly. It was the early 2000s. We all made mistakes. Elsie turned the page, then stopped. A black and white photo, Nathaniel's parents. Standing on the steps of a little brick house, she glanced at him. They look happy. They were, till life got bigger than the house. He reached out and touched the corner of the photo. My father always believed legacy was something you build. My mother believed it was something you give. Elsie watched him. Which do you believe? She asked. He looked up at her, then down at their joined hands. I believe. Legacy is who you leave the world better for, not what you leave behind. She let that settle, then nodded. That's what I want to be part of. He turned to her, eyes softening. You already are. The next morning, a small box arrived. In the mail, no return address. Nathaniel opened it, while Elsie made breakfast. Pancakes with cinnamon, and a syrup she called magic in a bottle. Inside the box was a ring, old, worn gold, faded in places. A single sapphire at the center, surrounded by small petals of silver, and a letter. Nate. She reminds me of your mother. I was saving this for when you found the kind of woman who saw the man. It's not the bank. It belonged to her grandmother. You don't have to use it. If it feels right. You'll know. Uncle Ben Nathaniel stared at the ring. He didn't think about headlines. Or strategy. Or what anyone would say. He just thought of her, laughing softly as she stirred pancake batter. Her hair pulled back, her sleeves rolled, her hum barely audible over the sizzle of the stove. That night, he didn't plan anything extravagant, no. Rose petals. No speeches. No stages. Just them. A blanket on the rooftop garden. A string of soft lights, and a warm breeze that carried only the scent of lavender. At night, they sat watching the stars. Elsie was wrapped in one of his sweaters. Mug of hot chocolate in her hands. Do you think, she asked, that we'll be okay in the real world? Away from the quiet? Nathaniel turned to her. We are the quiet. She looked at him, unsure what he meant. He continued. People build noise around themselves. Noise of fear, ego, control. But you make silence feel alive. That's what I fell in love with. She blinked. You said it. I did. She smiled. You didn't even flinch. Been flinching since the day you walked in that door. Pause. Then she asked, barely above a whisper, Did you know? That night? Nathaniel turned to her fully now. I knew the moment you looked up. I saw everything you weren't saying. She set her mug down. Elsie, he said softly, pulling the small box from his coat pocket. I don't want forever because it's expected. I want it because with you, every ordinary thing becomes extraordinary. He opened the box, the ring. Glimmered in the soft rooftop lights, quiet, timeless. I don't care where we live, or what people say. I just want a life where the door is always open, and you're the one on the other side. Elsie stared at the ring. Then at him, tears welled. But didn't fall. She reached out slowly, hands trembling. You really want? Me, she whispered. He smiled. There's no version of life I want that doesn't have you in it. She didn't say yes with words. She leaned forward, kissed him gently, and placed her hand in his after the rooftop proposal. The world slowed again. Not because it had to, but because they let it. There was no rush to announce anything, no urgency to post or prove. The ring lived on her finger like it belonged there. Not because it sparkled, but because it settled her. like a small, steady weight that said, "You're not going anywhere."
You're home.
One morning, Nathaniel came out of the shower to find Elsie reorganizing the medicine cabinet, not in a hurry. Not like she was claiming space, just quietly, making room. 2 toothbrushes in the cup now. Her favorite chamomile tucked beside his aftershave. A pair of gold earrings resting in a tiny porcelain dish. He leaned against the doorway and watched her for a moment. "What are you doing?" he asked. She smiled, not turning. "Folding myself in." He stepped forward and wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You don't have to fold," he whispered. "There's room for all of you." She leaned back into him, steam from the shower still clinging to his skin. "Sometimes it takes time to believe that," she said. "But I'm getting there." They had little traditions now. Not planned, not forced, just gathered like stones from a beach. Tuesdays were for takeout, and no phones. Fridays for music and windows open. Sundays for tea in bed, and talking about everything and nothing. One afternoon, Elsie brought home a plant, small, unassuming, a pothos vine in a clay pot. Nathaniel looked at it, amused. "What's this?" "A test," she said, grinning. "If we can keep it alive for 6 months, we're ready for a dog." He raised a brow. "That feels like a very specific scale." She shrugged. "Plants need gentleness. Dogs need purpose. If we can do both, we're good." He smiled and placed the plant by the window. "Then we better name it." She tilted her head. "Name the plant." He nodded solemnly. "Commitment starts small." They named it Frank. Frank thrived. Some nights, Nathaniel painted again, but this time, not just her, he painted their spaces. The hallway where she sang off-key, the corner where she journaled, quietly, the window she always sat near when it rained his. Brush captured presence, not poses. And when he showed her one of them, a soft canvas where she was wrapped in a blanket, holding tea, with a storm curled outside, she cried, not because it was beautiful, but because he saw her, the way no one else ever had. A letter arrived one morning. Thick parchment. Official seal. LC opened it at the breakfast table. It was from the Midtown shelter. They'd read the article, seen the interview, and wanted to invite her to speak it there. Annual fundraiser. Not as a guest, not as a story, but as a voice. Her hands trembled as she read it aloud. Nathaniel set his coffee down. "You don't have to," he said gently. But she looked at him, eyes brighter than fear. "No, I want to." The night of the fundraiser, she stood in front of a crowd of donors and survivors and board members in folding chairs. The lights were soft, the room quiet, and she told the truth. Not the glossy truth. Not the version you memorize in sound bites. The real one. She spoke of how people don't just lose homes. They lose faces. They forget how to look in mirrors. They forget how to ask for things, even kindness. But then she spoke. Of that night, of the door that wasn't locked, and the man who didn't look away. After her speech, a woman approached her. Maybe 40, soft scarf around her neck. Tired eyes. "I lost everything last year," the woman said. "I almost didn't come." Elsie reached out, gently touched her hand. "I'm glad you did," she whispered. The woman swallowed. "Hard. You made me feel like maybe I'm not ruined." Elsie smiled.
You're not.
"You're becoming." That night, back at home, Nathaniel held her close. "You changed something tonight," he said. Elsie, half asleep on his chest, murmured, "I just told the truth." Sometimes he said, "That's the bravest thing a person can do." The next morning, the pothos had grown another inch. Frank was thriving. Elsie smiled at it as she poured her coffee. "Better start looking at puppies." Nathaniel, reading the paper, didn't look up. "Already bookmarked some." She grinned. The seasons changed. Spring, with its promise of soft things beginning again, came quietly into the city. It arrived not with fanfare, but with small signs. The smell of wet sidewalks. The first bloom in a window. Box. A warm breeze that carried no hurry. And with it, Elsie changed too. Not into someone new, but more fully into herself. Nathaniel came home one evening to find her on the balcony, curled in her favorite chair, a sketchbook on her lap. He smiled. "What are you drawing?" She held up the page, half shy, half proud, a sketch of a coffee cup. Their coffee cup, the one with the tiny crack down the handle. "Why that one?" he asked. She shrugged, grinning. "Because we keep using it anyway. It got the dog. A rescue. Brown. With white paws, wide eyes, a little unsure, but loyal, like he'd already been theirs forever. They named him Oliver." He slept curled against the door at night, as if protecting the idea of being let in. One Saturday, they visited the cottage by the lake. It looked just as they left it, quiet, sturdy, waiting. Nathaniel built a fire. Elsie brought the journals she now filled with ink and feeling. They made pancakes from scratch, laughed at the ones that tore, and danced barefoot on the old wooden floors as the wind hummed against the windows. Later, wrapped in a blanket on the porch, Elsie rested her head on his shoulder. "This place feels like a heartbeat," she whispered. Nathaniel kissed her forehead. "It's where I first saw you clearly." She turned to look at him. "I think." Back in the city, life did what it always does. Some days were light, some heavier. They argued not often. But honestly, Nathaniel once forgot her speech at a gallery opening. She once left for 2 hours without telling him, needing air. But neither of them walked out angry. Neither of them slammed doors. They learned to pause, to breathe, to listen, and every night they returned to each other, even if it meant starting over, especially then. One evening, a package arrived. Brown paper. No return. Labeled. Elsie opened it. Inside was a small notebook, spiral bound. The cover creased. The paper inside filled with sketches of her. She stared in awe. Slowly flipping through, there was one from the first night, her back turned, head tilted toward the restaurant's candlelight. Another from the cottage, her legs tucked beneath. Her reading, unaware of being watched, and dozens more, moments she hadn't even realized he was capturing, moments she thought had slipped away. She looked up. Nathaniel stood across the room, was quietly watching. "I didn't know you kept them," she said softly. He stepped closer. "I couldn't throw them away. They were the parts of you I didn't want to forget." She held the sketchbook like it was made of glass. "Why now?" He paused. "Because you're ready to see how beautiful you've always been." Tears, WELLED. Not from sadness, but from the weight of finally believing. The next morning, it rained. A soft, steady kind of rain, not the kind that ruins plans, but the kind that invites you to slow down. Elsie stood at the window, a blanket around her shoulders, watching the droplets chase each other down the glass. Nathaniel joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned into him. "I used to hate the rain," she murmured. "It meant cold nights, shoes, empty pockets." He rested his chin on her shoulder. "And now," she smiled faintly, "now it feels like a song." They stood there a while, the rain painting the silence. No rush, no need to be anywhere but here in the background.
Oliver sighed contentedly from inside.
His spot by the door, Frank the plant, had grown thick and wild. Now hanging from a hook near the kitchen, they called it Frank the Overachiever. And the apartment, once sleek, curated, and cold, now pulsed with life. Not perfect, but real. Later that day, Nathaniel found a note on his pillow. In Elsie's handwriting. "I used to think home was a place then. I thought maybe it was a person, but now I know the truth. Home is wherever someone sees your soul and stays anyway." He read it twice, then 3 times, then folded it. Tucked it into the same box where her first letter still lived, the one with her name written in the corner of that restaurant. Napkin, they were writing their story together now, in moments. In quiet, in love, that never had to shout to be heard. There are days when nothing grand happens. No surprise, no twist, no plot, only presence. Only the quiet kind of happiness that comes when life finally feels like it fits. Not because it's perfect, but because it no longer needs to be. This was one of those days. The sunlight drifted in early, painting golden stripes across the hardwood floor. Oliver was the first to rise, tail wagging lazily as he stretched and trotted to the side of the bed. Elsie was still curled under the duvet, one leg peeking out, her cheek resting against Nathaniel's shoulder. He opened his eyes slowly. The world was still dim, still quiet, and he didn't move. He didn't want to. Because this, the weight of her breath, the warmth of her skin, the peace in his chest, this was enough later. They made breakfast together. He flipped the pancakes. She brewed the coffee. No fancy ingredients, no plans beyond the next hour. Just music from the old speaker. Some Billie Holiday. It's maybe a little Nina Simone. They danced barefoot in the kitchen between sips, and when Elsie caught her reflection in the window, hair messy, eyes bright, wearing his shirt, she didn't look away. She smiled in the afternoon. They walked Oliver to the park. They didn't speak much, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything was already being said in the way. Their hands met and held. They passed a bench, the same one where, months ago, Elsie had once sat alone, watching strangers pass, feeling invisible. She slowed. Nathaniel noticed. "You remember?" She nodded. "I didn't know then that life could come back." He tightened his grip on her fingers. "You didn't just bring life back," he said. "You created one." That evening, Elsie lit candles, not for mood, but for stillness. She placed one in each room. Little glimmers of warmth in corners that had once been too quiet. She sat on the floor with Oliver, brushing his coat, whispering stories into his floppy ears as if he understood every word. Nathaniel watched from the hallway, heart so full it almost ached, because what he saw wasn't just love, it was belonging. Later that night, as the city dimmed, Elsie curled beside him on the couch. They didn't need music. They didn't need distraction. Only the hush between heartbeats. Only the sound of rain beginning again outside. She rested her head on his chest and murmured, "You know, if none of this had ever happened, if I hadn't walked into that restaurant, if you hadn't made that bet, I would have found you," he interrupted. She looked up at him. "I don't believe in fate," he said, "but I do believe when your soul calls out long enough, the right one eventually answers."
House.
She closed her eyes. "I must have been calling for a long time," she whispered. He kissed her forehead. "So was I." They didn't talk about the future that night. Not about weddings, not about timelines or children or retirement plans. They only talked about now, how good the tea tasted, how soft the rain sounded, how rare it is to feel safe with someone and not need to perform. Elsie asked him, half asleep, "What's your favorite thing about us?" He didn't hesitate. "That we don't need noise to know we're loved?" She smiled. "Mine too." Later, as the moon crept high and the candles burned lower, Nathaniel watched her sleep beside him. She had one hand resting on her chest, the other gently curled around his. Her breathing was slow, even peaceful, and in that moment, didn't wish for anything more, not even for time to slow down, because for once, it wasn't running away from him, it was with him. 1 year later, same. City, same skyline, same man and woman. But everything. Softer now. It was spring again. Not the harsh, hopeful kind, but the gentle, certain kind. The kind where you no longer wait for the world to turn toward light. You trust that it already has. Elsie stood by the same restaurant door where she had once wandered in with worn shoes and a brave heart. Now the glass was cleaner, the logo etched in gold. But more importantly, this time she wasn't alone. Nathaniel stood beside her, suit jacket open, tie forgotten in a pocket, one hand resting gently against her back. She looked up at him. "Are you sure?" He smiled. "More than I've ever been." For something simple, not a celebration, not an anniversary, just dinner, but to them. The place where their story cracked open, where he dared fate, and where fate, for once, answered with a whisper. They were seated at the same table, the one by the window. The waiter was new, young, shy, nervous. He didn't recognize them, didn't know who they were, didn't know the woman in the soft green. Dress once came here cold and afraid, holding nothing but her name, didn't know the man with the warm gaze once decided to throw his entire life into the hands of a stranger, and that was okay, because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that don't need to be known. They just need to be lived. Dinner was slow, quiet, delicious. They shared dessert. He stole a bite. She pretended to be outraged. The waiter smiled at them. You two seem really happy. Nathaniel looked at Elsie, then back at him. We are. Elsie nodded, eyes gentle. Happier than we ever expected to be. The waiter tilted his head. What's the secret? Nathaniel glanced toward the entrance, then said softly, leave the door open. Someone just might walk through it. And change everything. They left hand in hand, the sidewalk still slick with spring rain, the streetlights glowing like candlelight as they walked.
Oh.
Elsie paused. She stared at it for a moment, then took a slow breath. Nathaniel watched. You okay? He asked. She nodded. Just visiting the version of me who almost walked away? He stepped beside her. She'd be proud, he said gently. Elsie turned. To him, eyes glistening, she'd be in awe. Back home, they lit the fireplace. Oliver snoozed by the hearth, tail flicking now and then in his sleep. The apartment felt like a living thing now, full of breath and laughter and memory. Elsie settled into the couch beside Nathaniel, her head tucked under his chin, the quiet stretched, long and beautiful. Then she asked, do you think there's such a thing as a full circle? He thought for a moment. I think when the door you once walked through becomes the door you now own. That's as full as it gets. She smiled. And we leave it open? He nodded. Always. Later, as they drifted toward sleep, she whispered something he almost didn't catch. Thank you for choosing me that night. And Nathaniel didn't open his eyes. He only answered softly, I didn't choose you, Elsie. I recognized you. And somewhere in the hush of that last breath before dreams, the door remained, open not to strangers, not to fate, but to love, to becoming to home. And now, dear listener, let this story become part of your stillness. You've traveled through warmth, through trust, through the soft unraveling of fear. You've felt the rain and the firelight, the brush of fingers, the hush of belonging. Let yourself rest now. Because the story is over, but because you are safe within it, you are seen, you are heard, and you are gently home. Good night, the end.